Breaking news. It was a massive strike. Putin is facing a catastrophe. 5 Russian warships have been blown up in the port of Novorossiysk. 200 drones blew up Novorossiysk. Yeysk, Kasimov, Tralchik, Valentin, Pikuli. Hundreds of Russian soldiers have been killed. Moreover, 2 missile carriers were attacked. That is, the ships, including a frigate-class vessel. Admiral Grigorovich, a Kalibr missile carrier. Essentially, this is the most powerful attack on the port of Novorossiysk. Putin is already gathering in a panic. The Ukrainian armed forces are counter-attacking in the south. The offensive continues, and a breakthrough to the Sea of Azov is possible. The Ukrainian armed forces have simply stunned them. And what a sight! The Russian LNG tanker Arctic Mitagas from Russia's Shadow Fleet was blown up after a drone strike in the Mediterranean Sea. Russian air defense shot down its own helicopter. We will discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Today is March 4th. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
So, Roman Lvovich, a powerful attack on Novorossiysk. 2 Kalibr missile carriers were attacked, including a frigate class. Admiral Grigorovich, in total, 5 ships and 200 drones were involved in the attack. What do you think? Was it a powerful operation?
Yes, the Russians have a problem with stress in words, at the very least. Somehow we always say it ourselves. Oil extraction, as the oil workers say. They are always correcting us. Oil extraction, so important you wouldn't believe it. It's professional slang, oil extraction. If you say it wrong, you won't get a bonus. And here it's exactly the same situation. If they had pronounced these Admiral Grigoroviches correctly, with the right stress, Grigoroviches in Ukrainian, then, for example, Malyuk wouldn't have touched them. The similarity with Roman Grigorievich, these admirals. But as it is, well, learn to put the stress correctly, comrades Russians. Federation, and as long as you remain a federation, naturally our defense forces will continue to sink the Russian Black Sea fleet. All the more so since they've served it up to us on a silver platter, driving it into the Novorossiysk Bay. There they cut it off, sealed it with booms, painted it, did whatever they could, tried to cover it up. But it didn't work out that way. We thought Malyuk was out having a beer with the girls, but at that very moment he was carrying out a combat mission at sea. And as I understand it, not just in Novorossiysk, they say something caught fire somewhere in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. And in Novorossiysk, the security service of Ukraine carried out a combat mission. In fact, a couple hundred drones entered. Some were taken out, but now there is definite confirmation. That is, operational control systems have already been decoded and confirmed it. 5 Russian vessels were damaged. The extent of the damage is still being clarified, because to damage or to destroy, or rather, to damage and to destroy are 2 very different things. But nevertheless, as I understand it, they all got a case of bear disease. At the very least, every one of those crews definitely experienced it. The Russians, as you can see now, are scrubbing the decks and everything else, trying to get rid of whatever is left of that Russian federalist smell in Novorossiysk. Moreover, you understand, one of our main objectives is still ahead, namely to establish a common Ukraine-Georgia border. We should have a common border with Sakartvelo, and it should run somewhere in the area of Novorossiysk. That's why there shouldn't be any trace of the Russian spirit there. And the strike capabilities we have, airborne, for example, are performing their combat missions quite well. Our surface, underwater, and semi-submersible means are currently at about the same level as they were back in the day. In that same Novorossiysk, a submarine was damaged, which still, it's just sitting there rotting. Further strikes will definitely continue. The main thing here is the confirmation that comes in over the next few days, either from our general staff, our intelligence, or from concerned individuals who also care deeply about striking Russian military targets.
Roman Igorovich, the most important thing, among other things. How serious is this strike for the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation? Because we always say that for some reason, Novorossiysk is like some kind of fortress that's simply impregnable for us. But now it turns out it wasn't so impregnable after all.
Well, like almost everything Russian, a lot of swagger, but when you poke at it, it turns out it's all rotten inside. Almost everything. So they don't have anything truly impregnable. The only thing that might be impregnable is something related to bunkers, and even then, only until someone gets to those deep underground bunkers. Putin is trying to bury himself hundreds of meters underground, and by now, at the very least, Chinese suitcases are already being brought in there. Everyone understands that. And basically, only that can be considered somewhat impregnable. Everything else is, of course, accessible, especially with 17 million square kilometers of territory. You'll never be able to seal it off, no matter how hard you try. the means of destruction that we have, especially since most Russian military facilities are located up to the Urals, that is, in the European part of the Russian Federation. And that's 2,000 kilometers. Now, our means of destruction can reach beyond 2,000 kilometers, that is, beyond the Urals as well. In the near future, most likely, they will show themselves in sufficient numbers. But in Russia, right next door, really, how many years has it been? It's only a few hundred kilometers away. And before that, as we discussed, there was about 2 weeks of preparation, a serious, systematic preparation to accomplish this task, breaking into the impregnable fortress, Cinderella, Ilki Palki, or Princess Nezmeyana. If we need to get to the Tsar, we'll get there, and even more so to the little one. Because it was a well-prepared operation. Over the course of several weeks, radars in Crimea were knocked out, missile systems were taken out, and anti-submarine aviation assets were neutralized. Remember, at that time, 22 to 27 Russian units were neutralized, and another 2 B-12S were taken out. Those are anti-submarine units, and recently another one of their Kashas was also taken out. A Russian one as well, also anti-submarine. So there was systematic work being done specifically to prepare for this attack. The most interesting thing is, I don't think this will be the last one. That is, why have the Avaro Russians already done such a good job? To restore the air defense to a certain level, they need about a decade, well, a week and a half to 2 weeks, something like that. Let's see, there may be a repeat attack on Novorossiysk in the near future.
I just want everyone to notice that 200 drones were used for just one Novorossiysk. This is really important. And that there is a huge number of dead Russian soldiers and many wounded, that is 200s and 300s. This is a really important operation because I haven't heard for a long time that we attacked almost 200 drones on just one military target. Roman Lagocha, the Russian LNG tanker Arctic Mathagas from Russia's Shadow Fleet, was also blown up after a drone strike in the Mediterranean Sea. What do you have to say?
Well, the Russians, at least some Russian, even some official public channels are already confirming that, well, not exactly confirming, but they're stirring things up. They're saying that our Sibibi or Beki, maybe even Magura, set out from Libya and struck the engine room of this gas carrier. From a technical standpoint, of course, this is possible. Specifically from Libya, it's possible to control the launch, to stop it, especially in Africa. Our intelligence service feels right at home there. Every other African there is definitely either with Budanov or with Kamar, and before that with Malyuk. And just try to tell them apart, whether they're with the GER or the SBU. So it's really not a problem to send Beki over from Libya to take out this tanker fleet, including Russian gas carriers. I don't think this is the first or the last, because there have already been several. A few months ago, we already talked about this. Our special operations carried out by our intelligence were conducted in the Mediterranean Sea. Basically, several Russian tankers were taken out there, or at least vessels that were directly involved in the military or economic activities of the Russian Federation. Well, naturally, a gas carrier, especially a gas carrier, first of all, from the so-called Gray Fleet, and secondly, under sanctions. So basically, it shouldn't even be there. And it was done very skillfully. A strike was delivered. The strike was delivered specifically to the engine room. Why the engine room? If seawater gets into the engine room, you can basically write off the entire ship, because once the engine takes in water, it just gets dismantled. And dismantling the engine pretty much means you can forget about using this gas carrier or tanker in that capacity. So it's a very skillful approach. The specialists worked on targeting, of course, on determining the point of impact and delivering the strike itself as such, specifically the engine. You need to let ocean or seawater into the engine room. That's it. You can write it off. That's exactly how our specialists operate. Or not our specialists, but those under our umbrella. I don't rule out the possibility that, for example, the intelligence services of other friendly states were involved. Libya, for instance, why not? For a small fee, a bouquet of flowers or a bottle of vodka, sure, they'll carry out a combat mission and we'll say that we did it ourselves. The main thing is that it was done. This is very important because this Russian fleet provides, well, a significant flow of oil, or rather a serious flow of petrodollars into the Russian treasury. So of course it needs to be sunk, if possible, at least without causing harm to the surrounding waters. So in this sense, it's even better the way it is now. That is, they struck the engine room, something burned there, but at least they stopped it without causing environmental problems.
Roman Igorovich, and of course there's the constant stream of information that the Ukrainian armed forces are counterattacking in the south. The offensive continues, and I see a huge amount of information in the media and reports suggesting that a breakthrough to the Sea of Azov is possible and that the Ukrainian armed forces could catch the enemy off guard. What do you think?
Well, let's look at it from a military point of view.
Let's continue.
Why? Because it's clear that journalists find this interesting, and it's also understandable that they want to hype up a certain news story. It's just that there are things that are actually achievable and there are things that are impossible by definition. At the moment, a breakthrough to the Sea of Azov is an unachievable task. Why? Because it could have been achievable in 2022. Moreover, in 2022, with only sub-caliber means of destruction available since the troop density, the Russians had no so-called operational presence at all in the direction of the Azov coast. That is, operational space began literally 500 meters from the line of contact. It was 100 kilometers to the Azov coast from there. There wasn't a single Russian outpost. At that time, it was possible to move across and cut them off. In 2022, this could have been done. In 2023, this could have been done as well. In principle, the Russians had already built the Surovikin lines, but still, the same operational space existed, stretching in depth for about 30 to 40 kilometers from the line of contact. By breaking through the Russian positions, it was basically possible to reach the operational space and once again reach the Azov coast, accomplishing the objective. But for that, you needed either a large number of operational level missiles or aviation, specifically aircraft capable of using unguided aerial bombs. To cover those 30 kilometers in depth along the Surovikin line, this could have been done in 2023. At that time, the Russians had only 1,300 troops. That's all. In 2022, there were 180,000, but 150,000 of them were cut down there. At the moment, the Russians have 700,000 troops. They are deployed across 100,000 square kilometers of occupied territory on our land. That means they are almost at 100% operational strength. There is no operational space left up to the Azov coast. Well, roughly speaking, for understanding, in every one of our villages, there is definitely a Russian unit stationed. Naturally, the entire line of resistance is practically mapped out all the way to the Azov coast. In other words, at this point, we can no longer break out into operational space in that direction. We can keep fighting for a long time. We can all get wiped out, so to speak, break ourselves against this direction, and we still won't solve the issue. Even with an aviation component, it won't work right away, just like that. This could be done, let's say, only if you have at least, right now you need at least 3 brigades, but ideally 5 brigades at this point. In 2023, this combat mission could have been accomplished with 2 aviation brigades. Now you need about 3 to 5 brigades. That's somewhere from 120 brigades and up to 200 aircraft again, which would be working over Russian fortified areas for quite a long time. This is not something that will take just 1 month. We would have to literally break through, bomb the Russians toward the Azov coast, and then the movement itself as such would still be under attack with flanking strikes from Russian forces, again with dense concentrations that would not allow us, with the forces and means we currently have, to reach the Azov coast. This should not be done right now. This needs to be done only after strikes have been carried out on Russian rear positions, after the collapse of the Russian economy, after the collapse of Russian operational rear areas, including army logistics, so that it would be impossible to bring up enough Soviet forces to ensure the security of the land corridor. In other words, this is essentially a task for about 3 years from now at least. Only after the collapse of the Russian Empire has begun will we move toward the Azov coast. What is being done now? A counter-strike, a counter-operation, a tactical level counter-offensive operation is being carried out, firstly, to improve our own defensive positions, and secondly, to destroy the group of Russian troops that they have stationed there, under the cover of the spring offensive from the direction of Huliai-Pol toward Pokrovsky in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Now, with this counter-strike, by regaining control over more than 400 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, we have neutralized the problem for Orikhiv, for Zaporizhzhia, and for the Dnipropetrovsk direction. In other words, this is the fulfillment of a task, but I repeat once again, it is a tactical level task. Don't look for anything more. There was no operational breakthrough there.
Roman Grigorievich, it's also being reported that Russian air defense has once again shot down its own helicopter. They are also shooting down their own planes. There have been a lot of such incidents in the past month. Russian war correspondents are complaining about it. What do you think about this?
At least on my 8, well, there is also information about the Ka-52, but the latest information just came in. The Mi-8 had a crew of 3 people. That is, 2 pilots and a flight engineer were killed. There is nothing unusual about this, so to speak. The thing is, for example, when 200 drones were heading toward Novorossiysk, at least a squadron of helicopters, army aviation, meaning helicopters, tried to shoot them down. The flight speed of a drone and a helicopter is about the same. Well, the average speed of a drone is 150 to 200 kilometers per hour. The nominal flight speed of a helicopter is 200 to 250 kilometers per hour, so the difference is only 50 to 100 kilometers. It's even hard to tell them apart on the radar, especially if something is malfunctioning, like the friend or foe system. Now imagine a man-pads operator, some guy sitting there with an igla, half drunk, somewhere he's been assigned to defend some protected facility, so it's a side guard, and he's just sitting there with it. It's a man-pads, it's a missile, but he doesn't have any system. He doesn't have friend or foe. All he sees is the heat signature, that's it. Some kind of targeting is happening. Out of fear, he launches the missile. But really, what does that flying cow, the Mi-8, need? Back in the day, I flew helicopters myself for a year and a half on the Mi-24. And at the same time, our squadron structures were flying Mi-8S, but it's a very good target. You probably couldn't ask for a better target than the Mi-8 in this sense, especially for a man-pads. A low-speed, non-maneuvering target with a strong heat signature. Even a single missile is enough to bring it down. And the Igla basically handles these kinds of targets in no time at all. And 2 Iglas, so for serious targets, they usually fire 2 missiles, and that's practically a guaranteed kill for any helicopter. So there's nothing unusual about it. They've shot them, they're shooting them, and they'll keep it up, especially when they're hungover. Somewhere around there, Medvedev passed by.
Roman Nikolaevich, meanwhile, the good drones stirred things up in the Kirov region. The governor of the region, Alexander Sokolov, stated that drones attacked Kirovo-Chepetsk. As I understand it, according to Astra, the drones struck the Uralchem chemical plant. The distance from the Ukrainian border to Kirovo-Chepetsk is about 1,300 kilometers in a straight line. What do you think?
If there's an opportunity to somehow include it in our stream, show the video of the Russian ship with ammonium nitrate being blown up in Beirut in Lebanon. As we discussed before, this will give you an idea of what our drones are trying to achieve when they attack Russian petrochemical plants. Almost every plant that produces ammonium nitrate, and that's practically all of them, runs on gas. That's mainly what they produce. Ammonia, of course, and sometimes ammonium nitrate is produced. Concentrated nitric acid. So nitric acid and ammonium nitrate are components of almost any explosive substance. Well, besides the fact that ammonium nitrate is used as a fertilizer, and it is, Russia uses it entirely for that purpose. In principle, it's actually the main ingredient in the production of explosives. And it explodes very well, very well. Roughly like a 10 kiloton bomb, I mean a nuclear one. Well, I'll say it again, if it works out, just put it in, people will be pleased. That's about the kind of explosion that happened, maybe a bit smaller, in Dorogobuj. There was a recent strike in the Smolensk direction there on the banks of the Dnieper, also at a chemical plant. And here it's the same story, drones from 1,000 kilometers away. They're trying to locate warehouses with ammonium nitrate in order to completely destroy Russia's petrochemical industry. This can be done at petrochemical plants while things are in transit. That is, ammonium nitrate is mainly transported by rail cars, and that means that concerned individuals can work on this issue. We need to take a look. There are ways to identify them. There are mechanisms for determining which rail cars are carrying it. And the main thing is the location, especially in ports and during transshipment, meaning the ship's standard load is about 50,000 tons. And so if those 50,000 tons lying in the port explode, there will be no port left, and there won't need to be. There will be 200 drones, by the way, spent on that same Novorossiysk, but it simply won't exist after an explosion of that kind and that quantity of ammonium nitrate. That's why, as I already mentioned, the range is over 1,000 kilometers. Oil and chemicals in the European part of Russian territory, I think, will all be wiped out this year, because the number of drones we have has really increased lately. Many thanks to our defense industry and, of course, to our partners who give us the financial means and naturally sometimes allow us to manufacture on their sites. Drones aimed at destroying the Russian economy.
Roman Nikolaevich, Israel is striking at Iran's new leader. The son of Ali Khamenei, Mojtaba Khamenei, is already under attack. That is, Iran has just elected a new supreme leader. Mojtaba Khamenei, so now he is the next target, as I understand it, for Israel and the United States of America. What do you think?
Well, neither he nor Ohui discussed this with Trump. Remember when Trump nearly jumped out of his skin when Putin complained that some drones tried to fly over Valdai? What did Trump say back then? Well, you can't kill or destroy or at least target the leaders of a state. He was obsessed with this idea. For the duration of an entire week, he was continuously pulling out the very last remaining hairs on Netanyahu's bald head and never once bothered to tell him that this was something that really should not be done. Netanyahu most likely didn't listen to Trump. Netanyahu doesn't listen to Trump. Trump needs to be reported to. He definitely needs to be reported to. Well, not to beat him up, I mean just to explain that Netanyahu doesn't care about him at all. Not in any way. Netanyahu doesn't take him seriously. Absolutely. Why? Because he's starting to kill off the top leadership of the state. Some state, it doesn't matter. Let's not pretend to be great Orientalists here. That's the point. I'm talking purely about that. Purely the facts. Because, well, obviously that's sarcasm. So here, there are big questions for Trump, his family, for Netanyahu as well, and also for the Witkoffs and Kushners. We've already talked about this with you before. We need to launch a specific flash mob. Give Israel to Iran and everything will be fine. There won't be any war there. After all, they're suggesting we give Donbas to Russia. If you don't want war, give Donbas to Russia. All this Trump adjacent riffraff is suggesting it. Well, then give Israel to Iran and there won't be any war there. And you won't have to, so to speak, follow Trump's directive not to strike the Iranian leadership. Or at the very least, well, for sure, there won't be as many losses in just a few days. Thousands of people have died in this war. By the way, these losses are about the same as in our war with Russia. It's about the same level. So you can troll them from all sides here. In other words, you can try out the whole Kama Sutra on them in this sense. That's how you need to troll them everywhere. So our listeners who understand us in this sense, especially those who get our sarcasm, let's launch a flash mob like this. Give the Golan Heights back to Israel and everything will be fine. And there won't be any war. So in this kind of mode. And then let them jump around. And then we'll see how they try to suggest or force Ukraine to give up its occupied territory to Russia. Because this mess in the Middle East, we will keep rubbing their noses in it so that they do this in the near future. Well, as for the fact that this is a regime we all understand perfectly well, it's Iran at the moment. At the moment, the most interesting thing is that it's run by a police state regime. Oh, it's the IRGC after all. It's a special service. Yes, it has taken on quite a lot of functions from intelligence and counterintelligence to practically even space, but they're still cops. Just plain cops. Remember the Maidan in 2014 and before that, 2004. Cops who are trying to control the process to stay in charge of an entire country, driving thousands of people practically to their deaths. This happened to us, so we understand perfectly and support the people of Iran who are fighting for their independence from this cop regime. Once again, let me repeat, what should we call these cops? You can call them the IRGC, FSB, KGB, BBB, whatever you want. You can call them whatever, but they're still cops. And these Iranian cops who have now chosen yet another boss for themselves. Well, where is this going to lead? Obviously, there will be some resistance. Again, this is not even touching on geopolitics or politics. We need to support the people of Iran who are currently fighting for their freedom from this regime, including its police apparatus. As for what mechanisms WHO will help, that's not so important. The main thing is not to get in the way, which is the most interesting part. That's what should have been done there over a month ago. Yes, they simply should have been helped with weapons. That's what was needed. Like on the Maidan, in 2014, it was more expensive, miss. There were enough protesters with weapons, just think. Would even a single cop would dare look at people with weapons? It's exactly the same situation in Iran now. So right now, the main thing is not to create problems. Like recently, well, at the very least, there is already confirmation that a girls' school was indeed bombed. There's a big question about how many casualties there are, so we really need to be more precise in this regard. But the main thing is give weapons to the Iranians, starting with the Kurds, for example. The CIA is involved in this. There, besides the Kurds and Fallujah, there is quite a wide range of such compact groups that basically just need really to have small arms dropped to them from planes or helicopters, starting from pistols and up to automatic rifles. And that's it. Well, a sufficient amount of weapons, of course, meaning ammunition as well. And they solve the issue themselves. And with this next Ayatollah, or whatever the correct term is, I'm not an expert, I won't lie, that's for the specialists. That is with the next leader of all this Iranian police apparatus. The Iranian people, well, there are 90 million of them, they'll overthrow him in 3 seconds if only they had the means. There wouldn't have been so many casualties over a month ago, tens of thousands. All this police apparatus crushed the freedom-loving people of Iran. So that's the kind of mechanism that should exist. But to chase after yet another leader, well, they'll kill one more and then they'll just pick the next one. The police regime in this sense is self-restoring. It can only be dismantled from within. The only thing that can be done is to support the processes happening inside the country and nothing more.
Israel struck the building of the Iranian Assembly of Experts who were selecting the new Ayatollah. 8 high-ranking clerics who were tasked with electing the new supreme leader of Iran reportedly say they were evacuated. But I repeat once again, since they elected the son, Ali Khamenei and Mojtaba, the time has come to discuss a new intermunicipal route within Kazakhstan. Tragically, the situation there is dire, with 80 people wounded, 101 reported dead, and several others still missing. Simultaneously, Iranian ballistic missiles are currently flying through the airspace toward Turkey, where they are being actively intercepted and shot down by defense systems. In general, the scope of the war in the Middle East is rapidly expanding, and it is no longer confined to that region alone, especially now that the waters of the Indian Ocean have effectively become a new and dangerous battlefield for these global powers. What do you think?
Yes, it will definitely spread. And why is that? Because an aircraft carrier group has arrived, and in addition to air cover, this carrier group is definitely being protected by submarines as well. In other words, it's a whole complex. The Lincoln aircraft carrier is heading there. Several dozen ships of various classes are gathering there to ensure its safety at certain distances. At distances beyond the combat radius of the weapon systems on frigates, destroyers, warships, and so on. They will sink it. How else could it be? A submarine won't ask, "What are you planning over there?" As for the Iranians, well, that's clear. What's happening now is the beginning of an expansion. It's unfolding. And by expansion, I mean military expansion. Again, let's be objective. This is a very correct and competent action, not allowing anyone to get within striking distance. For example, certain boundaries are meant, referring to the main aircraft carrier groups or the assets that ensure the safety of the carrier. So it's the right approach. But if we are being completely honest about it, yet another killing of some appointed, recently designated and appointed leader. Well, let us take a moment to be realistic here. War is essentially just mathematics, Pandi, and it is all as straightforward as a simple piece of cake. Even if, say, the Israelis kill one newly appointed leader every day, and there are at least a couple million of them, how many years will they be messing around in the Middle East? So basically, it's a completely pointless topic as such. It's clear that the Israelis want to somehow take part in the process to show off a bit. That's what I call it. But if we're talking about things that are actually feasible, then of course they're absolutely pointless as a strategic objective. So much more optimal actions. Again, let me repeat, without any preferences. Right now, I just want to highlight the purely technical military aspect. So the sinking of the frigate is much more effective than killing yet another so-called elected or supposedly smart appointed person who will simply be putting a signature or a stamp. In other words, just a stamp bearer, essentially. We all understand perfectly well that the decision maker is not the one who gets elected, but someone else, somewhere else. And as far as we're concerned, we've spent so much time looking for this trump card, Ali Babayevich, that rat king who was in charge of the process. We still haven't really found him. We also have a big question about who is actually making the decisions here. It's definitely not those talking heads they show us on TV. And it's the same picture here. So when carrying out a combat mission, you need to focus on real combat targets that allow you to calculate the degree of damage inflicted. The enemy's capabilities, that is targeting the enemy's capabilities, especially striking at key targets.